Now I'll go ahead and assemble the camera mount. It consists of these 3 acrylic pieces. There is another camera mount piece that we'll add a bit later. For now, I just need to connect these 3 pieces together. Before I do anything else, I need to peel off the protective paper layer. It is glued on the acrylic to protect it during transportation. So I will find a corner where the layer is loose and slowly start peeling it off. No need to rush. This layer is removed. Repeat the same with the second set. If one corner is difficult to peel, switch to another. Until you find a loose corner. If necessary, you can use a screwdriver or scissors or knife to help with the peeling. This layer is off. Repeat the same with the other plastic acrylic parts. This one is off. Again, keep repeating until you find good corner. If necessary, use, as example, a screwdriver. Once a corner starts peeling off, usually it's fairly easy to finish the peeling. Next one. In case the paper breaks, don't worry. You can continue from a different corner or even from the place of the breaking. There is no point of trying to protect the paper. It is fully disposable. And now all 3 pieces are clean and ready to be assembled. Now I will go ahead and start the assembly. These acrylic pieces, as you can see, are not fully symmetric in all dimensions. Here they have a little round cutout. Both of them. The idea is to insert this piece that has the cutout into this slot here. Pick a side and insert. It appears to insert quite stable. Later on, if necessary, I may decide to put a little glue to hold it in place, but even without glue it seems to hold reasonably well. Repeat the same with the second one, inserting the side with the slot, with the little round cutout, into the slot. And press. It doesn't take much force and it stays in place reasonably well. This step is completed. Now I'll go ahead and install the camera mount base on the upper layer, upper deck of the chassis. The reason I do this before I have installed the upper deck on the lower deck is that I will have difficulties accessing all the nuts here underneath once the two decks are joined. For this, I will first install the camera mount and the Raspberry Pi, allowing all the standoffs to align properly, to be able to tighten them here, and then proceed with the rest of the assembly. So for this, I'll take the already assembled camera deck base, or whatever you want to call it. Use 4 bolts of the included bolts in the back with the camera deck parts. Insert the bolt into the standoff and tighten. Then go into a diagonal one, allowing any deformations to be properly distributed and the part to properly self-align. Repeat that with the rest of the bolts. Do not tighten the bolts yet until we place the last bolt. Now I can go ahead, tighten this bolt, and even use a little wrench to hold the nut on the bottom. And tighten with a screwdriver. Then go to a diagonal one, repeat the same procedure. Diagonal, same procedure. And the last one. Do not tighten too much, because you can crack the acrylic. It should be enough to hold everything together. Now just go ahead, make sure all the nuts are properly tightened. And the installation is completed. Now I'll go ahead and install the Raspberry Pi on the upper deck of the chassis. For this, I will use 4 of these spacers. They will also serve the purpose of holding on top the Raspberry Pi hat for the robot. So I will place the Raspberry Pi with its Ethernet and USB, the big ones, connectors pointing toward the back of the robot, and this camera connector, I believe this is the camera or display, no, this is the display connector, the display connector being closer to the camera mount. This is Raspberry Pi 4, I'm not sure how the other ones will look like, but in any case, make sure these big connectors are pointing toward the back of the robot. Now I'll pick one of the spacers insert the male thread through one of the openings here and tighten loosely. Repeat the same procedure with diagonal one. Another one. And the last one. They're plastic, so be careful. Make sure the thread is properly inserted and do not force it. It should tighten fairly easily. Now I can tighten the nut on the bottom and tighten everything together. Do not over tighten, since this is a plastic spacer and it is easy to damage the thread. Now I'll go ahead, make sure all the spacers are reasonably well tightened. And this step is completed. Now I'll go ahead and install the Raspberry Pi hat on top of the Raspberry. The hat is in anti-static back, so I'll cut the back, take it out, examine the board, it is obviously XiaoR Geek design. It has quite a long spacer, and now I'll go ahead and install it on top of the Raspberry Pi. Carefully inserting it in place into the Raspberry Pi connector here. On the positive side, thanks to the large, very long spacer connector here, the board leaves plenty of space for the cooling of the Raspberry Pi, which I'm sure will be needed in case we run computer vision on the Raspberry Pi. And now, using these really small bolts that I measured and appear to be fitting the plastic spacers, we insert one of the bolts into the spacer and loosely tighten. Insert the diagonal one, tighten loosely, allowing enough wiggle room for self-aligning. The third one, and the last one. And now we can go ahead and tighten all of them. Do not over tighten, since the spacers are plastic and we can easily damage them if we tighten too much. This step is completed and we have all the electronics installed on top of the upper layer of the chassis together with the Raspberry Pi.